let's start by checking in with you. I know we already talked offline, but now we're talking online.
We're talking online.
We took a week off last week, and honestly, we probably deserved it anyway because we've been busy, but as you mentioned on our social media channels, you had some health issues, and you don't have to go into all of it if you don't want to, but just wanted to check in with you, see how you were doing.
Thank you. So for folks who didn't catch it on social media, right after the Appalachian Studies Conference, I was admitted to the hospital here in Charleston. I was able to make it home, thank God. They tried to mitigate the issues that I was having for a couple of days, but it turned out that I needed emergency gallbladder surgery on Tuesday. So I was in the hospital for 5 days, which was terrible. I didn't have a window. There was a window, but they had it blurred out, so you couldn't actually see outside because it was an ugly view of the roof. So they were just like, you don't need a window.
That sucks.
Yeah, it really sucked. But I am now recuperating at home. That's why we're in a different location than usual, because I needed to sit on the couch. And if I'm adjusting a lot, it's because I'm still in a lot of pain. Because pregnant bellies just don't need to be operated on. And if you missed that, I'm also 7 months pregnant. So I had this surgery while 7 months pregnant. And I have 4 holes now in my pregnant belly, and they hurt. And so I'm recovering. But thank everybody who reached out to send well wishes. It was a tough week, or scary week, especially with the pregnancy. But I really appreciate so many people reaching out and wishing me well.
Damn. We are glad that you're okay. I was very worried just because anytime I'd never even considered the prospect of surgery while someone was pregnant. So, and I'm not a doctor in case anybody had any confusion on this show, just a Juris Doctor. And so that sounded terrifying. Didn't know they could even do that. So glad you're okay. And the people listening, you better be fucking grateful, all right? Because you're here, you're on a couch in pain, but you decided that you were going to record this show.
Yeah, no, it's going to be good. I'm already sweating from the pain, but we're going to make it through.
Well, you're going to be sweating from the intense buildup to a lot of these topics, I hope. We'll see. You have not... Go ahead.
Oh, I was say I'm thrilled to actually be talking about something different, though. So that's what, I have to be here. I have to be with Chuck, got to be with my people. And I just have put absolutely no time into this episode because I've been so sick. So,
which that's the beauty of it, because we're going to get your authentic reactions.
Yeah.
No, you have not looked at the notes, and we're going to be postponing the new Patreon limericks, just by the way. So don't worry, folks.
They're coming.
Because you don't want me doing them. Trust me. We have a list this week. It's actually it felt like it's been a while since we've done a list, because we had a week off and then we did the Canton closure.
Yeah.
But we have a new list this week, and very excited about it. It involves a actor turned born again Christian known for being in the show Growing Pains with Robin Thicke's dad, Kirk Cameron. Have you ever heard of Kirk Cameron? Are you familiar with that?
I've heard of Kirk Cameron. I have never watched Growing Pains, though.
Growing Pains Prime was just before my time, but I had watched it because it was just incessantly on reruns on whatever channel it was. I don't even remember. So I watched plenty of episodes of it. It was, one of those shows, whatever. And then he became a crazy born-again Christian and is apparently evangelizing the world with his bullshit. I would also point out, and this is very important, he starred in the film adaptation of the Left Behind book. Did you read those?
Okay. So, I never read them because my mom read them, had them all in our house. She said they were very entertaining, but we watched the movie one time and it scared the ever-loving shit out of me. And
Mission accomplished if you're Kirk Cameron.
Yeah, I thought every time that I was like, every time that I couldn't find someone in the house, or every time that like I was like, oh God, I've been left behind.
Yeah, they were about the rapture, just so anyone is not clear. And the rapture is this event in, I don't even know what, like,
It's not even
what,
biblical.
what genre of Christianity, because like Episcopals did not fuck with that.
Yeah, Methodists neither.
Okay, so it probably was made up later on to further enforce compliance. That's I would assume. But basically, it was like with all the Jesus-loving believers are taken to heaven randomly in the middle, whenever that happens, and then all the non-believers are left behind to fend for themselves, and then some of them get taken back, and others, I guess, fuck off to hell. Great book. They had a kids series. I crushed those fucking books. They
had a kids series.
Oh. Fuck yes, they did.
Oh, I didn't even know
Jerry
that.
B. Jenkins and Tim LaHaye. I still remember the authors. Yeah, they had it was like a whole thing. They were small books. They had like 20 of them. I fucking demolished those before realizing that it was fucking propaganda out the ass. And I was horrified
that's what my mom said. She was like, the books were great. They were really entertaining. And they were like they were page turners. They were really good, but like the problem she had with it was that it was like not actually something that she wanted her kids to like believe that was real.
Yeah. I good on your mom. I don't think my parents realized what it was, cuz I think I got them at a yard sale or something, cuz the covers were pretty dope.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It was just like, whoa, this is some intense shit. But it was like it wrote it like it's this action novel.
Yeah.
And it's funny.
That's how they get you.
One of the big themes in them was about the Antichrist, and the Antichrist comes, and he's presented like a guy that's really likable, that kind of feels godly, but then he turns on you. And I think, I'm not formally accusing Kirk Cameron of this, but there is evidence that Kirk Cameron is the Antichrist.
Oh shit! Okay.
Just
wait. One
just
question.
saying, just throwing it out there.
One question.
I'm not accusing, just asking questions.
Do they admit in the series or in the movies that the Antichrist is a white man?
I have no idea because it's been over 20 years since I've read the books. However, I would assume. Or wait, well, I don't know. It would make more sense if they painted it as a minority, but I'm not sure.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But like, if it's a white dude,
I gotta go look back at that.
I really want to know. I really, really want to know. But
Do you
remember? Do you remember when Obama was first running, and there was so much hype about him being the Antichrist? I have never heard more talk about the Antichrist.
And that's why, because I mean, I don't know how it tracks in whatever fucking tome the rapture comes from, but in the Left Behind books, it presented as somebody who's very charismatic, very likable. Lots of people glom onto them, and so that's how they justified it with Barack Obama, because he's very charismatic. Right. A lot of people liked him. He was reelected. He was elected twice. So yeah, I mean, and that was a convenient cover for someone like Kirk Cameron to fly under the radar.
Makes sense. All right, I want to hear about it.
So you may be wondering why we're talking about Kirk Cameron. So this is, I will say this is Appalachian adjacent because it wasn't really in Appalachia, but this story was too good not to pass up. And by good, I mean infuriating. So he got a librarian fired, a library director, rather, in Sumner County.
Mad about that.
Yeah, you should be. In Sumner County, Tennessee, which is, I think, northeast of Davidson County where Nashville is. So it's still in Middle Tennessee, but in a more rural part of the state than Nashville. He got a library director in Sumner County, Tennessee, fired after Kirk accused them of, quote, unkind pushback during a conservative event at the library in February. Yeah, so this was an article from the Tennessean. Emails indicated that the guy, his last name was Morales, I for some reason didn't write his first name down. He was concerned about the event's size. He said, quote, our invitation was sincere to read a book during our story time. He wrote to the representative for the book publisher. We guard that time because it is for small children and not adults. We work hard at not promoting any agendas, left or right. I don't want to add to all this. I'm hoping now that they have fired me that the community can move on. There's not much point, and there's not much of a point to giving my side. At the end of the day, I don't hate anybody.
That's so
Kirk Cameron,
sad.
It is very sad, and I think it's because like there was some commotion during this event where Kirk Cameron was promoting his whatever garbage book that he's putting out. And so yeah, he complained. He got mad, and so he canceled a library director, a fucking library in Sumner County, Tennessee.
Do you know what the book reading was? Like what they
It
were?
was for. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just like which book that they were reading to kids?
It was. Well, I think it was Kirk Cameron's book.
Oh.
Like it was the book. So let me pull this up real quick. So he has a spiritual children's book called As You Grow.
Okay.
And the director allegedly told the publishing company who joined forces with Cameron on the book he was concerned that you were bringing the movement to the library and all the other things that come along with it.
Got it.
Oh, how sad. So basically, Kirk Cameron wanted to cancel library director because he was big sad that somebody didn't like his children's book.
What a baby.
He is a baby. He's a big man baby. But as with most man babies, there's lots of examples of them being a man baby.
Yes.
Or just being wildly unhinged. I've got the top 5 for you.
Oh, incredible. Okay, I'm so ready.
I hope you are. Top 5 wildly unhinged things Kirk Cameron has said or done. Number 1, thinks that God has plans with hurricanes.
All right. Starting out hot. Well, at least he thinks that God controls hurricanes and not the Jews.
That you wait on the Jews though.
Oh boy.
Just pump your brakes. Pump your brakes. Let's not praise him on that yet.
Oh boy.
So this is a long list, Callie. You gotta just.
This reveals that I really haven't read it.
Yep. In 2017, after Hurricane Harvey, which devastated Houston, as many of you will remember, and Hurricane Irma, which pummeled the Caribbean and Florida, and one of the strongest storms ever recorded, happened, Kirk decided it was time for him to opine on these meteorological events. Yes, his credentials as a Growing Pains actor and the lead in the Left Behind series.
Well, I mean, if anybody can talk about meteorological events, it's the Left Behind series actors.
Abso-fucking-lutely. It's a sign of the rapture. Who else but that? So he said, quote, "How should we look at 2 giant hurricanes coming back to back like this?" Cameron says calmly in the video, speaking from the Orlando International Airport after a business trip to Florida. Big fucking airport, too. MCO, what up? Do we write them off as coincidence? Do we write them off as a statistical anomaly? Wow! Who would have thought? Is it just Mother Nature in a bad mood? I don't know how you think about it, but I think it could be something much more than that. He then proceeded to read the biblical passage, Job 37:13, stating that God causes storms to happen for punishment or to water his land and demonstrate his faithful love. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that the entire flooding of the city of Houston was not faithful love, and if it was, that's a fucked up way to show it.
Yeah, no way. Also, punishment for what? Did he specify?
Oh, actually, let me look, because he may have blamed abortion. I'm honestly not sure. He said, define punishment for our collective sins and to teach us humility. So that's kind of actually a bullshit cop-out. I'm more pissed that he didn't pin it on abortion or something like that. What a bitch.
Yeah. He's got no backbone.
Pussy.
This is sad already. Sorry.
It is sad. It's going to get sadder.
Oh, boy.
So, this would be number 4. I'm going to go in reverse order. Number 4, compared Charles Darwin to Hitler and the Nazis.
What?
So, he created a revised version of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, which is a very important work that talks about human existence and creation, I believe, with the new 50-page preface rebutting the long-accepted scientific beliefs.
Oh, my God.
Okay. Normal for an evangelical,
The
audacity!
Zealot.
Yeah. I mean,
mediocre actor white dude. Like, what?
Yeah, Charles Darwin, full of shit. Let me tell you something about the divine nature of Jesus Christ. It's gonna so he invoked the Nazis in a promotional video for the new edition by explaining that Adolf Hitler's undeniable connection with the theory Darwin's racism, his disdain for racism, and Darwin's thoughts on the existence of God. He said, quote, "You can see where Hitler clearly takes Darwin's ideas to some of their logical conclusions and compares certain races of people to lower evolutionary life forms. If you take Darwin's theory and extend it to its logical end, it can be used to justify a number of very horrendous things." So essentially, it sounds like Kirk Cameron's blaming the Holocaust on Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species.
I mean, this just like is not an even parallel. Like, sure, if you
no, it's absolutely not.
This is completely unhinged. Unhinged is the right word for this list. But like it does for me. He's saying if you take them to their logical conclusion, you think that the logical conclusion of Darwin's ideas is the Holocaust or eugenics.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, that's it. It's the mass extermination of the Jews. That's what Charles Darwin was really getting at, guys.
That doesn't make any sense. That is just absurd. Oh my God. I think I mean, you could absolutely pervert those ideas, but it's not a logical conclusion of them.
No. You can pervert a lot of things, hence the Bible. And I mean, he's clearly perverting it in quite a direction here. So that was incredible. It really was. It is a little more creative than just, Hitler, Jews, your normal discourse around that. Not giving him credit, just pointing it out. The next one, though, you'll appreciate. You may want to actually consider investing in this.
I'm excited.
He charges $39.99 for marriage advice. This is number 3.
Wow.
Yeah, I know what you're thinking.
For the
Great
low
deal.
price.
Great deal.
Incredible.
Yeah. Well, and I went on the website. You can actually get a 30% discount code.
Damn.
Too. I know. First time a consumer of it. If you're wondering what kind of advice you might be getting, though, this is a quote he recently gave to the Christian Post about his marriage, which I think kind of gives you a little bit of understanding of what this advice might look like.
Oh boy.
Do you have any guesses before we go into it?
It's gotta be. Is it something about like the man having to provide?
Provide is a word that he wouldn't use. Provide sounds almost generous.
Oh no. What is it?
Well, and I mean, it's very vague. He says that wives are to honor and respect and follow their husband's lead, not to tell their husband how he ought to be a better husband. A lot of people don't know that marriage comes with instructions, and we find them right there in God's word.
That was physically painful for me to hear.
Yeah,
well, if I took him up on this offer, let's just be real. He would tell me to get a divorce because I can't be a good Christian woman married to a Jewish man.
Right, who might be taking Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species to its logical... Wait, no, Danny wouldn't do that. Never mind. You might do that.
Right.
Actually. So Danny is in danger in your household.
Right. As is our unborn child. And to
think you,
I definitely think that he would not be a fan of me or my marriage. So I don't know, even though I kind of want to do it just as a gimmick. Like I want to do it for our Patreon subscribers.
Yes, use some of our Patreon money to pay for this.
I don't know.
I mean, I don't like contributing money to him, but it might be worth it.
I know it's a hard decision. Maybe we should take a poll on it and see what our subscribers think. And I would be more than willing to actually do that.
Oh my God, I can just see it now. You get dressed up like in very conservative looking clothing.
Cover up all the tattoos. Take the nose ring out.
So just to be clear, Kirk, abortion totally off the table.
Right, I am 7 months pregnant and I'm considering it. So, what are your thoughts? Just to be clear, I'm not considering an abortion right now. We very much want this baby, but that would be so funny to say that to him.
Yeah, he would love that. Yeah, I'm sure. You'd also probably find a way to blame, I almost said Heidi, Frankie's disability on you living in sin before.
Oh,
you were married.
100%.
So I'm sure that.
Yeah,
that's
even though we
absolutely what I think.
adopted him on purpose, like because he had a disability.
God knew.
Yeah.
He was in the dog rapture.
Right, Frankie, yeah.
Yeah, poor Frankie. Sorry, Frankie. God-hating dog. Number 2, I'm kidding. We love Frankie.
I did. Wait, this is a sidebar. So when I was in the hospital, they gave me when the baby was kicking the incisions, they gave me like some really strong medicine that in the immediate aftermath
of fentanyl.
I did, well, that was in the emergency room. This was something else. God, I can't remember what it was. It was like one step below Dilaudid. But it made me like very drunk in the first half hour of having it. I was just like out of my mind. Like it was basically like when you wake up from your dental surgeries and stuff like that. So they put it in my IV. 10 seconds later, I am absolutely out of my mind. And I talked about some really funny things. We can go into more depth about what those things were. But one of them, I was extremely concerned about Frankie going to heaven.
That's incredible.
I just kept asking.
Poor guy.
I kept asking my mom. I was like, I really don't know. Like, is Frankie going to be in heaven? And like, it was just so, and they were like, have you been thinking about this? Like, what is the, I'm like, when I was lucid again, I was like, I've never thought about that in my entire life. Like, I have no idea what made me think of that. But I was extremely concerned with my dog, making sure that he was going to heaven.
It's interesting, like, where that pulled from your subconscious. That's hilarious, though. Frankie's definitely going to heaven. He is heaven. That's like he is the body of Christ. I think something like that. Number 2, though, moving right along. Number 2, of course, he hates the gays.
Oh, even better.
You knew it was coming at some point. And this is still not number 1. Number 1's fucking wild. So Kirk Cameron said that homosexuality was unnatural, detrimental, and who knows to what, and ultimately destructive to so many foundations of civilization. He then issued a statement acting very confused why someone would construe that as hateful to gay people, saying, quote, "Some people believe my responses were not loving toward those in the gay community. That is not true," he continued. "I can assuredly say that it's my life's mission to love all people." And then implied in parentheses, and judge them for having a sinful lifestyle.
This, the whole, we got to get past this whole love the sin or hate the sin thing. It's not love, buddy. It's just not.
No.
It's
is. Judgment.
It's judgment and it's meanness.
And the only reason he says that is because in Christianity, you're not supposed to hate people. So he had to save his ass. And that's the only reason he clarified it, I bet.
Absolutely. He's like, oh, I love these people, but I also don't want to ever be around them or have them near my children or help them or make sure that they have rights or are treated like human beings. No, thank you. But I love you. Have a good day.
And we're not going to spend too much time on this. It's pretty run-of-the-mill, sort of garden variety gay hate coming from him. Nothing too special, but didn't want to exclude it. Number 1, though, the most unhinged thing, in my opinion, not based on the severity of harm, but just of the most unhinged nature. Number 1, made the movie Kirk Cameron Saving Christmas.
That's the title, Kirk Cameron's Saving Christmas? Wow.
Yes. Possessive. Kirk Cameron's Saving Christmas.
The ego on
I don't think it's possessive because it's like, it's saying
about the ego on this man.
Oh, absolutely.
How much he thinks he can speak on all of these topics and like that he's a genius and that he just has to be possessive of it's just he's such a classic, very mediocre white dude.
Whoever turned him, whoever made him born again, whoever his maker was in True Blood speak, fuck you to that person because you created a monster. So this movie is wild. I have not watched it. I couldn't put myself through that pain for this, not even for you all listening. He decided to try his hand at making a Christian family comedy and putting the Christ back in Christmas. That was the premise. It was produced by none other than Liberty University.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah. Well, and I was wondering, is there a director's cut that has footage of Jerry Falwell getting cucked by his wife? I mean, where is that footage, you know? And in Santa Claus's sleigh.
Guaranteed it's in there somewhere.
Yeah, I hope so. Kirk Cameron probably, he probably greenlit it, I bet. Anyway, because they're holy men, Not only is this cringeworthy premise for a film, but this guy is, like you said, such a narcissistic sociopath that he decided to make himself the lead Bible-thumping protagonist. And not only that, but play himself in the movie. Which, by the way, he will not kiss anybody that's not his wife in movies. So when it comes to a scene where he has to kiss somebody, his wife is a stand-in, like I guess a body double for whoever the female character is in the movie, so that he kisses her because it's not Christian.
Oh boy.
I cannot imagine what kind of a miserable life.
Yeah, there's no way that this is fun for him. Like,
No.
Did he direct it too? Like, it's his film.
No.
He's starring in it. Did he write? Like, yeah, he's like producing it. It's like so narcissistic. Oh,
it is. Well, and the only reason it was a commercial success is because the budget was only $500,000 and it made like 2.1 million, which was probably just funded by a bunch of evangelical churches.
Oh yeah, they would take their youth group to see it or something.
Oh, for sure. So, Rotten Tomatoes, as you can imagine, gave it a 0%. But that's due to the woke critics who hate God.
Always.
So he was so upset by this. Kirk Cameron posted on his Facebook, of course, because that's where you're going to rally all the troops, is Facebook. Absolutely. And I'm not kidding. Like, that really is. He said, quote, "Help me storm the gates of Rotten Tomatoes." Hilarious opener. "All of you who love Saving Christmas, go rate it at Rotten Tomatoes right now and send the message to all the critics that we decide what movies we want our families to see." This attempt resulted in a severe backlash in which the internet traveled to Rotten Tomatoes and condemned the film.
I just fucking love the internet. It just
it has its moments of being horrible,
what it giveth,
but
it taketh away. I mean, I have to admit that, but this was a giveth. And I love it when it turns out like this. It's just so beautifully orchestrated. So what happens? What happened like when everybody was like, "No thanks."
That's what drug it down to 0.
Wait, it literally has 0%.
Yeah. Well, it did at the time of the article was written. I haven't really looked at it now, but
that's not
what's
hard
funny is
to
like
do.
it wasn't even a good. It is, and I think part of the reason is because it was a shitty movie even for like hardcore Christians. The Christian Post had a very like meh review of it. Like, they weren't gonna say torch this shit, but they were just like, yeah, so he certainly has his interpretation of things. It did. Okay, this is great though. Lastly, it became the lowest rated film on IMDb's bottom 100 list at the time, which Kirk Cameron blamed on Reddit and atheists.
Because, of course.
Because they hate Jesus. They hate the real reason for Christmas. And they hate, they love sin. They love debauchery, hedonism, and kissing other people's wives.
That's
and gay
what
sex.
Redditors are all about. You named all of the things.
Yeah, oh yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the
this
list.
This man needs to
Kirk
calm
Cameron,
the fuck down.
He needs to smoke weed, man, or something. I don't know. I think he just needs detoxed from this mind warp of Christian bullshit that he's in. I say this as a Christian.
Yeah, I mean, look, we got on this show, we got nothing against Christianity. We got everything against this kind of weaponized, bigoted, cruel, and like very backward Christianity. I have a lot of problems with that.
I do too, not the least of which being, the whole hurricanes are a punishment for our own collective sin, which, okay, if that's the case, why isn't California getting hit by hurricanes? Because Kirk Cameron, buddy, your people believe that California is the hotbed of sin. Hello, it's like where the porn industry is. It's where weed was first like going crazy other than Colorado. It's where all the debaucherous shit happens. So why isn't California getting smacked by these hurricanes? I don't know. Seems like there's a flaw in the logic, folks. We'll do announcements next week, folks. We're Callie's recovering. Give her a break. Stop complaining.
Thank you,
right?
Chuck.
Stop it.
Thank you.
Tired of the DMs. See, that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. We have an interview with Matt Hildreth, the executive director of Rural Organizing, which is ruralorganizing.org is what I should say. An organization that uses smart communications and strategic distributive organizing to empower rural progressives and develop, pass, and implement policy platforms needed to rebuild small towns across America. Love it. Also, you will, I wouldn't say recognize or know Matt because he doesn't speak on this, but he is also the producer for the acclaimed podcast / live show Weekly Skews with Trey Crowder and Smart Mark AG. Great show. Check it out if you haven't already. One of the well-read guys is on it. And it's good stuff. This was a great interview. I really loved it. And I think the work that Rural Organizing is doing is extremely important, and I'm very into it. I think that this type of movement building is necessary and imperative to actually get progressive policies passed. And
I agree. I think that this interview was really interesting. It kind of builds on some of the conversations that we started last year, like with Anderson Clayton, like with even with some of the like Doug Jones, our interview with him, Senator Doug Jones. I think that in looking forward, these are the types of things that Appalachia needs to be thinking about as we try to, even if we're not winning, lose forward. And so I felt like Matt just had a really great grasp on what we were interested in talking about, what we wanted to hear about, and great takeaways from previous campaigns and really great ideas for upcoming, 2024 stuff. I just thought it was a really fruitful conversation that kind of sparks what we want to talk about moving forward too when we have these political organizing discussions. So I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, he really brings like a smart, nuanced take to this, and that's what's needed in this type of work. Rural America, as we've talked about ad nauseum on this show, is not a monolith. It's not all just farmland and cornfields, folks. And so I think like he brings a really nuanced take. He's really smart about it. Has a smart team, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch with him and making sure that we're helping them out as much as we can. So with further ado, no more further ado. All the ado is out the window. It's gone. The dew is off the grass because it's mid-afternoon. Our interview with Matt Hildreth.
That was actually really funny. You should leave that in.
And
it was really funny.
Just for you. But excuse me. My goodness. So I know a little bit about your organization, but not a ton. So I'm really, really excited that we could all get together and talk and do this interview, because I think that just in general, rural organizing is something we love to focus on. So to get started, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you. What's your background look like and what got you interested in rural organizing?
Yeah, sure. So I actually started my career in broadcast. And so I grew up in a small town in South Dakota. I kind of like most of my friends growing up, the first thing I wanted to do was leave. And that's kind of what I did for the first few years after I graduated high school. So I went to college in Minneapolis, spent some time in Los Angeles and New York, and then ended up working on a reality show hosted by Amy Grant, which was in my hometown. And it was, the whole point of the show was to go around and grant 3 wishes to all of these different, communities. Anyway, horrible experience because, I grew up in a small town. I know people who were impacted by the show, and, people that were going through like cancer in the family and all this other stuff. And it was just horrible to see how, people I knew and people I grew up with were treated by the crew and cast were great, but just the whole concept of a reality show coming in was just pretty devastating after I worked on it. So I switched my career around that time more into politics and kind of the overlap between politics and media. So I worked for a magazine called Sojourners Magazine for a while, which is a progressive faith-based magazine. And then from there, I was covering some immigration raids in Iowa. And I was just sort of shocked at how horrible the federal government treated immigrants based on some of the coverage I was doing for the magazine. And I spent 10 years working on immigration policy after that, kind of from that communications standpoint. But while I was working on immigration, I actually moved back closer to where I grew up and where my family's deeply rooted, which is in the region of the country that is called Siouxland, which is around Sioux Falls and Sioux City. So I was on the Iowa side of the border. I grew up on the South Dakota side of the border. My parents are all from the Iowa side of the border. So I went and moved back home. I was living in Congressman Steve King's congressional district, which, for those who don't remember, he was sort of the first modern version of the white nationalists we see today in politics. And so we organized locally in his district for about 5 years. Eventually, he was primaried by a Republican, in large part, I think, to some of the organizing that was happening on the ground there. From there, I decided, hey, you know what? There's really something to this rural organizing stuff. So actually, it was around 2012 when I bought the domain ruralorganizing.org. When I drink, I buy URL. So one night I was like, I can't believe that nobody's has ruralorganizing.org. And so in 2012, I bought it and used it initially as a hub for, people like me, progressives living in the community that were looking for resources. So we connected people with a lot of Wellstone resources and Iowa CCI and other stuff like that. And then around 2018, we filed for a formal tax status, launched a formal organization. And at that time, I had moved to Ohio. So we incorporated in Ohio.
Steve King, what a throwback.
Yeah. I love that he's a throwback, by the way, because
yeah,
it's bizarre. Yeah. It's bizarre how he's out with all this new white nationalism that's in.
It really is wild. But yeah, that just brings back so many flashbacks, like Vietnam style to like the mid 2000 teens. So what is the mission of ruralorganizing.org and how do you set up your organization to make the biggest impact?
Yeah, so our mission is to build a rural America that's empowered, thriving, and equitable. So our focus really is on kind of 3 areas of work. One, we're really focusing on changing the paradigm. And that paradigm is often pitting rural America against urban America. It's often positioning rural people as obstructionist, as kind of, the reason why we can't have anything nice is because rural people don't want us to have anything nice kind of idea that we have about politics. So we really work on changing that paradigm. Second, we work on building political power. So we're a 501c4 organization, which means we can actually do some politics. And so we do kind of political organizing around candidates that are focusing on our issues, which then brings me to the third thing we do, which is policy. So we have a really strong policy team. We're focusing on a national agenda that's really building small towns and rural community economies, or economies in small towns and rural communities from the bottom up. So we just were able to pass a new pilot program through the CHIPS bill that's called Recompete. And it's $1 billion pilot program focusing on regional economic development that really leads first with like empowering small businesses through investing in public services, and then sort of starts there and builds from up. Traditionally, what happens, for those that know, is corporations get big tax breaks and all these big tax incentives, like we saw with Amazon and others. And they always promise, hey, if you give our corporation all these, tax dollars, we're going to create jobs. Well, the jobs never come. So we find that there's a better approach, which is starting from the bottom up, focusing on public services, things like childcare, brownfield redevelopment, all that type of stuff, and then going from there. So we obviously are progressive, boldly progressive, proudly rural is in our name. But our focus is kind of pushing on those progressive policies, and then also expanding the progressive policy landscape to include things specifically focused on small towns and rural communities.
Excuse me, my goodness. I'm going a little off script here because this kind of made me think of a question that I have. So I think oftentimes in social media discourse, we see a lot of urban rural resentment. And I always wonder how much of that translates into real life, because as we know, Twitter and that kind of stuff is not real life. How much of that do you see like in the progressive movement from your standpoint with ruralorganizing.org, where there's a divide between urban and rural progressives? And if that does truly exist, how do you work to kind of bridge that divide and help people maybe in urban areas understand the issues that impact rural people are also issues that can impact them as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a few things. One, I think the divide definitely exists, and I think sometimes we accidentally, as progressives, play into it. And I think sometimes just with our language, we reinforce that divide rather than recognizing that, people in cities are facing a lot of the same issues that rural people are facing. I mean, the other thing is that it's not so much true anymore, but especially a couple of years ago, when people said rural, they meant white. And that is something that is a real problem. Like so much of rural America, I mean, rural America is whiter than urban America, but it's only by like 10 to 15%. I mean, and so it is whiter, but also when you kind of equate rural with white, you're leaving out like the tribal communities, you're leaving out immigrant communities in the Southeast and the Midwest that are, responsible for processing food. You're leaving out the farm working communities in the Southwest and in the West that are growing the food. So, I mean, that there's, I think, ways that we just accidentally forget that, that rural is much more complicated. The other thing that I'll say is, I grew up in a small town, and there's tension even within people like me that left. And, I don't live in my town anymore. And when I talk to my friends back home, it's not like that they're super excited about all my politics. But there is a disconnect just because you left. So, in a lot of communities where you have out migration, you have tension between those who left and those who stayed. And I think that's really hurting us. Like for a lot of small towns, one of the best resources they have is the human capital from the people who did leave. And so people who left and got experiences in other places, oftentimes they can bring those experiences back. And if the community is good about reaching out, and if they're good about staying connected, they can really help with local revitalization efforts or anything else where they can take the skills that they've built in other places and bring them back home, even if they're not living there. So I think overcoming that challenge is really important. And I think that, some of the most rural, economically distressed places are also the most Democratic voting counties. And so even if you're looking at population loss, if you're looking at, economic indicators, unemployment, things like that, a lot of that has to do with the fact that, rural is not white, but also there is a legacy rural progressive Democratic voting population that's just been so ignored for the last 20 to 30 years that I think we forget that they were there.
Yeah, I love this idea. In my circles, we've called it like the Appalachian Alumni Network of folks who still love their home. And we've called it on the show Expat-Appalachians, people who have left for whatever reason, but still have so much of their identities tied up in where they are from and in their homes. This does touch on my next question, though. So progressives in small towns, they so often think of themselves as alone. And we often, I mean, just in our networks, we often hear that people think that they're like the only ones in their community with their like mind, but we know that's not true because of the work that we've done in rural organizing. And so what has been your experience in helping people to kind of come together and in their small towns and communities and recognize their collective power within their community, even if they are small in number?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And for us, I mean, we think about it as a rural diaspora. I mean, there really is a push-pull migration factor that's happening within the United States. We often talk about migration and think of an international context, but the reason why people are leaving and the reason why people are moving is from rural America to urban America is the same reason why they're leaving South and Central America, coming to, places north of the border. So I mean, there's that real migration factor that I think a lot of people have just missed because it's right in front of us. The way that we try and bring people together, I mean, it's a fascinating dynamic. I hear about it, everywhere I go. I produce the Weekly Skews podcast with Trey Crowder and Mark Agee, and they, we get it from that audience as well, where it's like, oh, thank you so much. I didn't know people were here. It's a real interesting problem because I refer to it as a cycle of inviolability. Like when you go to these communities, you often don't see yard signs that express your political views. So nobody puts out yard signs. Nobody is vocal. There's no incentive to be vocal in these communities because the feeling you have is, well, nobody else is being, nobody else is here. Why would I stick my neck out just to get, knocked down when nobody's going to come to support me? And that cycle sort of continues, and we see it in politics. We see it on on different issues. But the first step, and that's why we put boldly progressive, proudly rural in our logo, is because you have to be willing to step out and take some shots. And I think once you do, everybody I've talked to is shocked to see how much that there's people in their community, that they're part of something bigger. We saw, for example, with abortion polling, the Kansas, voted to protect abortion rights at the ballot. For us, I mean, that was not a surprise. All of our polling showed that rural people, that rural people overwhelmingly support abortion rights. And so, we saw what happened in Kansas. We're like, yeah, that makes exact sense. That's perfect. But a lot of people were surprised by that because there's this whole narrative that's told to us by people that aren't from our communities about our communities. And we don't have the space to make those statements ourselves or to understand ourselves in that way. So I think we have to have people that are willing to be vocal. The vocal locals are a huge piece of it. We're huge supporters of yard signs, not because we think yard signs are the magic silver bullet in these communities, but like I've met my neighbors. I currently live in a rural area. Sorry. I currently live in a rural area. I met my neighbors in where I live today because I put a yard sign up, and they're like, oh my God, we thought you guys were Trump voters. This is awesome. So there's a real factor there that I think we need to address.
Yeah. And I'll just note here, just because our audience is primarily Appalachian, that Kentucky did the same thing as Kansas and voted down an amendment statewide. And I think that a lot of people were shocked by that. They said they're like, oh, it's Kentucky, because we have these stereotypes around not just rural communities, but entire states, entire regions like Appalachia, where you think one thing, but in reality, that it's a much more nuanced take than what people think. So our listeners many of them know that investing in rural communities and in rural organizing is vital to the future of progressive politics, to the future of our country. But we also know that we need to bring in national dollars. This is something that is challenging for not only state parties and for county parties and, the official systems of the Democratic Party, but also organizations that are working in the nonprofit space toward progressive goals. So I'm wondering, what is your message when you talk to national organizations who would maybe rather work in high density areas, who don't understand deep canvassing, who don't understand that it's worth it to invest in these communities? What is your pitch to them for rural communities?
Yeah, so there's two structural factors that I see. One is what I call the battleground bias. So a lot of red states are just not going to get national money to start because they're not a battleground. So a place like Mississippi, where you have um, a massive rural population, Mississippi is one of the most rural states in the country. I know Mississippi's not Appalachia, so I'm using an example from another place, but the Mississippi isn't getting the dollars it deserves, and a huge chunk, nearly I think almost 50% of rural voters in Mississippi are Black. And so, if Mississippi got the investments that Mississippi deserved, it would be a fundamentally different state. I mean, it is a red state because of voter suppression and voter suppression of Black folks, right? So there is something we have to be able to overcome in some way, that battleground bias. And I think a lot of that requires local folks to do the heavy lifting first. And I think the national groups have to be better about when a state starts, and I think it was pretty good in Georgia, but as a state starts moving out of the red category into a battleground category, that's when all the consultants and the federal quote unquote experts fly in, and all the people that got it that far are treated like crap. And so as we are looking to get states more into a battleground territory, I'm sure folks in Kentucky might be seeing this, but like as soon as the numbers look good, that's when the sort of experts, quote unquote, air quotes, experts show up and sort of take it over. So so that's, I think, one of the things. The other thing is we have to be more focused on margins. So we keep talking about the population density. It makes perfect sense that campaign strategists focus on cities. And, we absolutely support that focus because that's where the density is at. But there has to be something somewhere focused on cutting the margins. Trump was able to take the margins from, like, Democrats used to get 45 or 40% of a vote in the community, and now Democrats are getting 25% of the vote. Now, there might be only 8,000 people in that county, but that margin in that county, along with all the other margins in all the other rural counties, are just too big for Democrats to correct for. So, and then you run into states, especially like Ohio, where you don't have enough of an urban population. I mean, Ohio is very urban, but it's not enough to overcompensate for all of the rural losses. A place like Nevada, you can actually do that. But in places like Ohio, all the states across the Midwest, huge chunks of the South, that's just not possible. So we have to overcome the battleground bias, and we have to overcome the margins. And I think the solution is not to take money away from the cities, but to recognize that, like, running 30-second ads might not be doing what we think they're doing. And so it's less about taking money out of one place and putting it in another place, but moving money from the consultants and the TV ads and the high dollar, like multi-million dollar efforts that aren't having an impact, and starting to get that money into the communities.
That's a really, really interesting point about battleground bias. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because we were just talking to the chair of the Ohio Democratic Party yesterday, who brought up the lack of investment in Tim Ryan's Senate race as being certainly not an insignificant factor and one of the reasons why he lost. And if you look at the numbers, it certainly suggests that much. So I really like that, and especially what you mentioned about Mississippi. I mean, you can absolutely have competitive races there. They could very well have a competitive governor's race coming up there. You look at Kentucky, the same thing. So there's more nuance to it than just what color a state appears on an electoral map, which is what I always like to say. That's my hobby horse on the show. Looking into, we want to get into 24, but looking back at 2022, what do you think are some of the biggest lessons learned from that, and how you can build off that, especially from winning back rural parts of the country in 24?
Yeah. So we do, after each major cycle, we do what we call exit interviews. So we go around and find every organizer that worked in a rural space that we can, and we connect with them. We record the conversation and basically just say, what did you learn? And then we compile all of those findings. One of the things that we've been seeing the last couple of years is that we're asking people to do too much in rural places. So, for example, a campaign is coming in and they assume that there's already the foundation that they need to run a traditional campaign. Oftentimes that infrastructure does not exist. And so organizers on different campaigns are being asked to build the foundation of these relationships that have been non-existent for 20 years while at the same time hitting their vote totals. And that's just, it's too much, especially when campaigns are starting, late in the cycle. It's, I mean, a lot of times they're not even hiring their organizers until December of the election year. It's just not possible. So we have to find a way to have year-round organizing. And a lot of that is oftentimes done through issue organizing, which can be political or non-political, but just to keep people engaged, the constituents engaged, that at least creates that civic landscape, that civic infrastructure that can be leveraged during campaign cycles. So that's one of the biggest things that we've been really trying to focus on, is like, how do we have year-round campaigns that keep people engaged, that keep the base engaged, so when election year comes around, people already know each other, they already have the relationships, and it's just a matter of stepping into the space. That's one thing. The other thing is, abortion was a massive lesson learned for us. We did some polling for those that know rural politics. Yeah, everybody thinks the Farm Bureau is like the defining political force on the right. We found that actually an endorsement by Planned Parenthood is better for Democrats amongst rural voters than an endorsement by the Farm Bureau. And that's because so much of the campaigns that are run by consultants that are out of state or out of the region, they're running on stereotypes. They're not running on strategies. So they think rural, they think old white guy sitting in a combine farming. Well, only like 7-8% of rural Americans make most of their income from agriculture. And we've completely left out the service economy folks. We've completely left out the care economy of folks. And we've, immediately Democratic consultants will think rural, they think agriculture. As you all know, in Appalachia, I mean, agriculture is very mixed. And there's places where you don't have, huge spaces devoted to agriculture like you do in Iowa. But all the consultants think rural, they think rural Appalachia, I bet it looks like Iowa. Like, it's really that bad. So identifying who we're actually trying to win in these communities is key. It's young people, it's women under 40, it's men under 35, and figuring out what issues motivate them. And the issue, frankly, is right now it's abortion. And being able to distinguish between a popular message, which everybody agrees with, and a persuasive message, which actually changes voting behavior. A lot of the economic messages that candidates were using in 2022 were very popular. Republicans loved those messages, and then they voted for Republicans. When you're talking about abortion, you're getting people that are agreeing with you and saying, I agree with you, therefore I'm not going to vote for a Republican, I'm going to vote for a Democrat. It's a very different dynamic.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I still want to get to 24, but I have a question that I think ties directly into this. So we've seen, I guess, like with maybe, Ossoff's first race, and I'm thinking specifically of Amy McGrath's race, where folks in the community were really put off by the number of outsiders that they were bringing in, and the use of the campaign dollars, and their communities that they had outsiders telling them what's best for them, or what's going to be in their best interests. And so how do we prioritize rural communities, specifically in Appalachia, without making them just another commodity, like in those cycles?
Yeah, we have one of our board members is from the Appalachia part of Ohio, and she calls it electoral strip mining. I mean, that's a really great question, because frankly, a lot of rural voters understand that the only thing that they have left is their vote. And I think a lot of them, that's why they voted for Trump, because like, we don't really like him, but this whole system sucks. And I'd rather take a wrecking ball to the system than vote for a Hillary Clinton. I don't, I think that there's, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts, because I think what we need to do, and this might sound a little bit controversial, is lose more strategically. Like, before you can win, you have to lose strategically. And so many of these nationalized races, they come in, they lose anyway, and nothing is left over. And so, like, they all get us convinced that Amy McGrath is going to win, or Marcus Flowers is going to win, or whoever is going to win. So we're all willing to compromise and make all of these concessions to the experts. They lose. they disappear. There's no accountability, and there's no power that's built locally. So imagine if we would have lost, if we're going to lose anyway, let's lose in a way that is building power cycle to cycle. And I think that when you talk to local folks, they're much more like our motto literally in 2020 and 22 was lose less. And, it's when you talk to people, they actually liked that as a motto because it recognized where they're at. And it wasn't just like, hey, we're going to come in and win. It was like, hey, we're going to come in and invest in your community. So I think we have to get more okay with losing strategically.
I love that point because I think oftentimes people, I don't know if the right analogy is see the forest for trees or whatever, but I think that too often when it comes to building power, people get fixated on winning.
Yeah.
And you can point to so many examples. I mean, Georgia was not flipped overnight. It didn't just magically wave a wand to become blue. And I like to look at that. My friend and former host of the show ran in 2018 in West Virginia, a really small district in the Eastern Panhandle. And he lost by, I can't remember the exact number, it was like 10 points or something, but he did about 20 points better than any other Democrat had ever done in that district because he went and he actually invested time, and we were able to fundraise and invest resources in that district. And it was a small rural district. Most people had never even had their door knocked before. And so it's stuff like that where, like, no, we didn't flip a seat, but you started to convert and find more Democratic voters and more people that can be persuaded and convinced to vote for somebody other than a Republican. I think that that's such a really interesting point. I want to kick it over to Callie because she has a couple of questions about 24, and then we can wrap. But I love that concept of being able to build upon losses.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at 24, we know we have major rural battleground races on the map in Appalachia. I am thinking of Sherrod Brown in Ohio, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, Senator Casey in Pennsylvania, and many, many other down ballot races. So what is the strategy moving into 24 that we can that rural folks can coalesce around, because this is going to take our collective might to make some of these things happen. And I know that a lot of people, especially in the progressive space, are going to have to hold their nose and vote for somebody like Manchin. But we've talked about this. We criticize Joe Manchin on this show all the time, but if he decides he's running again for Senate, we're going to see a 180 from us, and we are going to be all about it because, Joe Manchin currently is the only Democrat that can win statewide in West Virginia, period. And that's something that we don't take lightly, and that folks are going to have to really get behind. And so I'm wondering, like in those kind of races where blue collar folks, especially in Ohio, who, Sherrod Brown has shown up for union workers time and time again. What's the strategy?
Yeah, well, so for us as an organization, Ohio is, we incorporated in Ohio. We're based in Ohio. We've been there for 6 years. So at Sherrod Brown is, you guys mentioned the Tim Ryan race, but the Sherrod Brown Trump voter to me is a fascinating voter. And there are way more people out there that are voting for Sherrod Brown and Donald Trump than people realize. Everybody talks about the Donald Trump, Joe Manchin voter. I don't think it's that different from Ohio to West Virginia. I will say, I'm not, I hate when people talk to me about South Dakota politics, or, especially when I was there, because I don't know enough about politics to tell people how to vote in these different states. I will say voting is the least you can do. Like literally, it's the least you can do. So I think a lot of times when people get hung up on holding their nose and voting for a candidate, they're not actually doing all the other work that goes. Sometimes they are, but they're not doing the other work that goes along with it. Like if you're building power for progressives in West Virginia, and you're a strategic thinker about politics, you're focusing on the next generation of candidates, you're picking out the issues, like abortion and other things that are really central to who we are. I think it's easier to vote for a Joe Manchin because that vote is just one small piece of a much bigger strategy and a much bigger puzzle. If you feel like the candidate is the savior and this savior is who you want and that savior is not going to help you, I think you have that's just not how politics work, right? Like even Sherrod Brown's one of my favorite politicians ever. And I would never assume that Sherrod Brown can do the work that community members should be doing, which is building power and building the community and bringing people together. So I'll say that. I do think that I'm hearing more in 2024 about rural voters from the national folks that I'm talking to than I have in any year. And that includes 2020, definitely includes 2016. So I think people are kind of, waking up to it. The thing that we have to stop, the number one thing I'm trying to get people to stop saying is we need to show up and listen, because Democrats have been saying we need to show up and listen in rural America since at least 2012. And if that's still what they're saying, it's sending the message that they haven't over the last several years listened. It also implies that rural people aren't Democrats, and Democrats aren't rural people. Like, the Democrats need to go into the rural areas and listen to the people in the rural areas, instead of saying we've always had strong Democrats in rural America. Democrats just need to listen to what the rural Democrats are telling us. And I think that's a fundamentally different focus. And I think we have to let people know that we're here, that we're engaged, that we're doing the work. And it's best if people get behind what we're doing, not trying to recreate a whole new wheel just because 2024 is going to look tough.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's very well said. I think about what you mentioned with the Trump Brown voter, and it gets me back to this point I always think about, where class really is such a powerful unifier when it comes to politics, and I think it's oftentimes been ignored to many people's detriment, but it really does have a powerful effect, because you can look at a rural community, a very rural community, or a very urban community, and there's still plenty of people that are struggling to pay the bills, and there's somebody to blame for that. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing about your work with rural organizing. I love hearing this. I love talking to you about this. And honestly, if there's anything that we can do to help you out, we would love to do that.
Yeah, well, thanks. I appreciate that. We'll let you know. And I'm a big fan of your show and the work. I should also say, I didn't say at the top, but it's amazing what's coming out of Appalachia. I mean, Appalachia, obviously there's a lot of rural folks in Appalachia. It's not all rural by any means. But on the rural Appalachia side of things, the folks there are just so out front, and it's compared to all the other regions, I think, in the country, there's more happening there. There's more energy, there's more creativity. So thanks to everybody that is listening to the show and doing that work, because it's definitely visible, and it's definitely something that others could learn a lot from. So I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I will put a plug in at the beginning of the show that there'll be many people familiar with you being known as Producer Matt on Weekly Skews, which is a fantastic show.
Hide my face. I've never appeared in person, and it's kind of turned into I'm like Al Borland from Home Improvement, who's the next.
Yeah, the neighbor.
Never see his face.
Yeah, it's a great show too. I really love it, and you all do a fantastic job. So, well, thank you so much. And again, if there's anything that we can do to be helpful, or if you have any resources that you want just shared with our community, or anything that we can share with them, just let us know, and we'd be happy to do that.
Sounds good. And do you know when this is going to go up?
Oh, great. So this, let's go to Under the Radar, because this one is, again, Appalachian adjacent, we'll say, but God, this one just really got to me. And I actually punted on another Under the Radar, because I had to talk about this. There is a very important, and this was actually brought up to us by one of our Patreon members, Abby. There is an article about a trans West Virginian whose case is going to Supreme Court, and it's about their participation in sports, how it relates to a 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause violation. We'll be talking about that in the future. I do want to mention it, though, that it is on our radar, even if it's under the radar. But today, we're talking about feeding kids, okay? And I try not to talk about Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
But I had to this time. Ben Shapiro, the man who stands for facts, except, of course, when he doesn't, the chief purveyor of facts don't care about your feelings, Ben Shapiro, a.k.a. Venus Shapinas, came out with a banger that needs to be addressed. Normally, we don't care to talk about him, but this one hits too close to home. He claimed that, quote, school lunches are not going to solve the problem of child hunger at any serious level. And then claimed that if kids aren't getting fed, that CPS should be involved, and it does not take that much money to feed a child. God.
If government can protect kids from the sick radical left, shouldn't they also protect kids from hunger? Wouldn't it make sense to strengthen food stamps and have school lunch be free, since some kids are in school lunch debt? Well, I mean, if you are a parent, school lunches are not going to solve the problem of child hunger at any serious level. If there is a problem of children actually starving, that is a child endangerment scenario in which CPS needs to be called. If you're talking about like actual child starvation, the truth is it does not take that much money to feed a child. I know I have 3 of them. You should be feeding your child before you feed yourself. It's that simple. There's a much deeper problem at work than school lunches if kids are legitimately starving.
Now, part of that is true. It does not take that much money to feed a child, which is why the government does it.
Wow.
I'll let you react to that. I'm heating up, but I want your
Ben Shapiro is just an absolute dickhead. I have to say it. He gets by. I mean, I really think that he rose to fame and notoriety because he talks fast and doesn't let people think fast enough to respond to him. And he 100%. Says things like this, like out of kind of one side of his mouth, and then talks about family values and standing up for our kids and protecting our kids. Like, that's the main thing on the GOP radar right now, is protecting our kids from the gays, the groomers, the drag shows, all of that. But when it comes to actually showing up for our kids and ensuring that they're not fucking starving, like, to say that school lunches are not going to solve the problem at a serious level. Like, I went to a school where most of the kids got free or reduced lunch. And I was one of the few kids at my school who ate breakfast at home, because most everybody ate breakfast at school. That is 2 meals a day. So fuck you for saying that it wouldn't change child hunger, because it absolutely does. I've seen it when I was a kid. I see it all the time. It's just like, what the fuck are you talking about?
You are 100% correct. It goes to show you, just like, again, a shocker, this guy's completely out of touch. I mean, he grew up in a pretty wealthy family. I'm sure that he's probably never set foot in a Title I school in his entire life. A school, he probably has never even met a kid that has been on free and reduced lunch. So here are the actual facts, Callie. Here are the facts that don't care about his feelings or his shitty culture war media company. 1 in 8 children in America live in households without consistent access to food. All right? That's a fact. That's a shitload of kids. 12.5 million kids receive free or reduced price breakfast on average, on an average day of school, and 21.7 million kids receive free or reduced price lunch on an average day. You remove that. That's 34.2 million meals every fucking day of a school week to kids whose families struggle to afford them. Or, if you want to put it in even more of a macro figure, that's 6.15 billion meals in an average instructional school year.
That's a lot of food. That's a lot of kids fed. I'm sorry.
You've got to be on another fucking elitist grifter planet to believe that this doesn't have any meaningful impact on solving child hunger at any serious level. You have to be on another fucking universe, another plane in oblivion, to think that does not help solve hunger. That's asinine, all right?
I just think it's so to even say that, it's just so difficult for me to understand. Was this in response to Minnesota becoming the 4th state to make sure that free and reduced lunch was available to everybody?
I don't know. I'm not sure. So the video, it was not on his show. I think he was like answering like a question on some like live feed or something, because like he didn't have his microphone in front of him. It's clear he was looking at a laptop. I'm not sure what the full context of it was, but like that statement even isolated is damning of someone's complete lack of knowledge of just the fundamentals of existence for so many people. And
I mean, I know kids that, like, if I don't know, if I had a friend who didn't drink their milk carton that day, that they would put their milk carton in their, and like they would ask for it and put the milk carton in their backpack so that they could take it home and have it later that night. Like there are kids out there who are that desperate that like they get the leftovers from other people's lunches to take home to their brothers and sisters or for themselves.
Yeah.
And it just is infuriating that there are people who would even suggest that children could even function at school. Like, you cannot learn if you're hungry.
No, you can't. It has been studied repeatedly, and it's been proven. And I think like what makes me so angry about this is it is personal in the sense, like, my mom for a number of years was a secretary at a Title I elementary school in Parkersburg. It was one of the poorest, if not the poorest neighborhood in the city, one of them. And it was the neighborhood that my mom grew up in. So she knew it very well. And she would come home crying a lot of days because of just the stories that she witnessed, of the utter sadness of what she saw. There were kids that, like, at one point, one year, because she was in charge of like all the enrollment and everything, so she knew like a lot about these kids and their families. There were 4 families in this school who were literally living out of their vehicle at one point. Over half the school, I believe, was on free and reduced lunch, or was on free lunch, and then I think the majority were on either free or reduced lunch. And it is heartbreaking to think like those 2 meals they get, because they would come in for breakfast. Those 2 meals were the only 2 meals a lot of those kids would get. All right. And that doesn't account for summer. God help those kids in the summer. And you can blame the parents till the cows come home, but honestly, this does not matter in that sense, because you don't punish the kid for the sins or lack of sins. I'm not going to blame the parents. I'm sure there were some that were negligent, but you don't blame the kids for the situation that they're in, because they didn't choose that situation. And,
right.
And there were occasions where she would talk about kids coming up to her asking if there was any extra food from lunch that they could bring home, because they had brothers and sisters that were hungry. And they would do that quite often because, you know, they were going to throw the food away or put it, like, I don't know, in the freezer or something. I don't know what it was, but like they technically weren't supposed to be doing that, but they did anyway, because like, how can you not? And when you see that, she saw that literally every single day, and it hurt her and broke her heart, because she grew up in that neighborhood and knew exactly that experience, because she lived that experience. And I will always remember that, because almost as fundamental to the education that you receive in public schools is the food that's being served, because so many kids don't get that. And these people complain, oh, why are we giving out free lunches? Motherfucker, you're giving out free education. That's called public fucking education, you dumb fucks. I'm sorry, like, this is something that is so disgusting and evil to be against. I don't fucking care. Taxes, to quote our great friend of the show, Catherine Gooding, you are entitled to people's tax money, because that's what taxes are. And I cannot think of many other things that I would want my tax dollars to go to than feeding a hungry kid. And it breaks my fucking heart to see people like this talk about that with such a massive fucking platform. Ben Shapiro has one of the biggest conservative platforms in America, and to be expelling this type of ignorant bullshit is so dangerous, because it gets melded into the minds of these people that are making these decisions, these lunatic school board members, these people in the administration of these schools that are thinking, oh, that's right, we don't want to give them a free lunch. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Conservative economics. Fuck that. Feed these kids. It is not a controversial issue. In fact, it's an extremely politically popular issue, and they did it in Minnesota with a 6-seat majority in their House and a 1-seat majority in their goddamn Senate. All right, I'm done.
Yep. No, I mean, I have no notes to all of that. I just, it really, disgusting is the right word for it. And the fact that he even said, like, it doesn't take that much money to feed a child. then why don't we give the fucking money
And
to
he's
the kids?
right. The cost breakdown for those meals is not a lot of money. You clown.
Right.
You almost stumbled
Yeah.
onto a point.
Right. It's just, I think it really is. It's one of the saddest things. I mean, we're talking a lot about Christianity in this episode, and like Ben Shapiro is one of the people who like tries to talk about Judeo-Christian values all the time. I mean, that's always constantly out of his mouth is that phrase. And I'm sorry, but there is no way in hell that if you are actually a Christian that you would think that it was okay to not feed hungry kids.
No, I mean,
Like that is just not something that's not something that I think that like that is where I draw the line. Like you are not a follower of Christ if you think it's okay to say, "Oh, we just don't need to feed these hungry kids anymore."
and like I'm not Jewish. Ben Shapiro is. I'm not. But I can't imagine there's any tenet of Judaism that would say, "Fuck them kids," when it comes to feeding
Yeah,
them.
I mean the main tenet is tikkun olam, which is to heal the
I swear
world.
to God, they're gonna say Hakuna Matata.
No, but it is to be healers of the world, and the idea of that is exactly feeding hungry kids, serving people. I mean, it is like it's a radical tenet of faith. And so, like, I know that Ben Shapiro talks about Judeo-Christian values, and that's his thing, that's what he gloms onto. And there's no way that it is not a Jewish value to feed hungry children.
I think his Judeo-Christian values extend to and stop at sexual orientation. And, I think
Sounds
what's
right.
really interesting, Callie, when you bring that up, just to kind of put a button on this, is that it would seem that those Judeo-Christian values would conflict with his ability to get clicks and views on his website, The Daily Wire, where he makes millions and millions and millions of dollars a year.